assume that if you can't, then someone, you'll raise your hand or say something. But I'm happy to be talking again. I am a huge fan of natural history museums. So when I got the invitation to come speak at the Natural History Society of Maryland, I thought it was awesome. I love the museum. Huge supporter of anything that gets people out in nature, excited about the natural world. So I'm very happy to talk to people who have similar interests and passions. So I am an assistant professor at the University of Delaware in the School of Marine Science and Policy. I've did most of my graduate work out in California and came out to Delaware, the East Coast. Never been to Delaware before, actually applied for the job back in 2018. But today I'm going to be talking to you about sharks, skates, and rays. So elasmobranchs, I say shark because that's what people always think about. But the flat sharks are equally important and equally interesting. So I'll touch on them a little bit, but primarily we're going to be focusing on sharks. So today I'll be talking a bit about, tonight I guess, about why I think sharks are so great. So getting going. So what is a shark? You know, it's a very basic question. What is a fish? What is a shark? When you think of a shark, most people think of this kind of imagery, right? The big sharp teeth, the dorsal fin menacingly cutting through the water, a shark coming in to bite and eat you, and it's, you know, very frightening kind of thing. But the reality is they're much different. This is a white shark, that's what everyone thinks of, you know, thanks to Jaws. But a shark generally looks like this. Generally, they're fairly small. They aren't all big toothy predators. A lot of them actually are very small, relatively inconspicuous. And that's one of the reasons why we're constantly learning and discovering new species. So when I say shark, I'm talking about a class of animals, of fishes that are cartilaginous. So they have cartilage skeletons. They are in the class Chondrichthyes. Chondros means cartilage. So it's cartilaginous fishes. That's the sharks, skates, rays, and chimaeras. Within that group, there are what we call elasmobranchs. So elasmobranch is Greek for strap gill. And you can see why they're called that, because they have these 5 gills, sometimes 6 or 7, depending on the group. A few have more than 5, almost everyone has 5. But you can see these strap-like things, and that's where they get the class or the subclass of elasmobranchii comes from. So when you think about a shark, there are some things. Sharks, when I'm going to use the word shark, again, as elasmobranchs, but that's different than bony fishes. So if you think of a fish, for the most part, you're thinking of what we call teleosts or bony fishes. So things like bass and flounder and herring and menhaden, things like that. So how are they different besides the skeleton? As I mentioned, the cartilaginous skeleton is a big one. Another one is they have replacement dentition. What that means is that they replace their teeth as they lose them continuously, as you all probably already know. That's one of the reasons why the fossil record is so replete with shark teeth, because they're constantly losing teeth. An individual shark will lose thousands of teeth, tens of thousands over the course of their lifetime. So a lot of teeth. Their upper jaw, which for us is fused to our skull. You can't move your upper jaw. It's part of your skull. That's not the way that sharks are put together. They have an unfused upper jaw, which allows them to protrude it, to move it out. They have gills, as I mentioned, 5 to 7 for the most part. Unlike bony fishes or teleosts, as I mentioned before, which all have gas bladders. So swim bladders that allow them to be neutrally buoyant in the water column. So if you're in the water, if anyone scuba dives, if you have a buoyancy compensator, if you fill it up with air, you go up. And if you fill it down, if they're deflated, you go down, right? So it's swim bladder is similar. Sharks don't have that. They use a very large liver full of lipid and oil to help make them closer to neutrally buoyant so they don't sink or float, basically stay right where they want to be in the water column. Unlike most other fishes, they have male intromittent organs. They have sex organs. Males have what we call claspers, which is very convenient if you're trying to identify the sex of a given animal. For sharks, skates, and rays, as you can actually tell externally. Most other fishes, you can't. You have to cut them open and look at the actual gonads to figure it out. So that's something that makes them very different. Related to that, they all have, the reason they have claspers, males have claspers, is they all exhibit internal fertilization like mammals and reptiles and birds, right? So they basically don't have external fertilization like all the other bony fishes for the most part. In addition, they have fin rays that are soft, that are called ceratotrichia. This is an X-ray of a dorsal fin right here. These are what we call the radials, but these thin finger-like or like little noodle-like projections go up in the fin and support it. Those are called ceratotrichia. And that is actually what East Asian cultures use for shark fin soup. So when they fin a shark, they're actually finning it and drying it out, and they're using those noodle-like projections in their soups. So sharks are very old. They've been around for a long, long time, probably closer to 500 million years old as opposed to 450 million years old. This is a very, 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 very long time. They've been around since before there are trees, before there are a lot of flowering plants, before the Saturn had rings. Sharks have been around, right? They've been around. The dinosaurs showed up, disappeared, and they're still here for the most part. So they're pretty much the base of all the vertebrate lineage. So we owe our history. We're here because of sharks being in the past and being so successful. And if you look through time, so this is just basically going from up here in the present. If you go down this way, it's going back in the past, the Cambrian, which is very, very, very long ago, 550 million years ago. This is just showing you basically how the tree of life evolved through time. Fish are the start of all of it. The first ones to evolve were jawless fishes. The only ones we have around now are hagfish and lampreys. There aren't very many. Then you had these placoderms, were this extinct group of fish that had these large cutting jaws. They were very common, very diverse, but then they got outcompeted actually by the evolution of elasmobranchs and chondrichthyans. We actually called the Devonian the age of fishes because that's when fish really went crazy, went wild. But it's really the Carboniferous, which is considered to be the golden age of sharks back here. Spiny sharks are called sharks, but they aren't actually. They're a bony fish that's slightly different. And this is what we think of fishes today. And so basically the thickness of these columns basically right here indicate how many different species there are, how many groups there are. So sharks are back here at the base of the vertebrate lineage. And you can see that everything that's evolved since that has a backbone is pretty much descended from fishes and sharks. They used to look very different, although if you looked at them, you would still say, hey, that's a shark, which is amazing. It's a great thing that we call convergent evolution in the sciences, which is where things that are confronted with the same problems keep evolving the same way of solving those problems time and time again. And so as a result, they start to look the same through time. So you have this Aquila lamna, which is recently just discovered maybe a couple of years ago. They call it the mantis shark because it had these really long pectoral fins. Pectoral fins, the ones that stick out to the side. Stephacanthus is another well-known one. It had this really weird dorsal fin that had these spines, these teeth-like projections that came out of it, and its head. We don't really know what they were used for. The idea is that reproduction, probably. Bandringa looks a lot like a sawfish or a saw shark, but it did very different things. But it was the first example we think that we've ever discovered of a vertebrate that actually migrates. We were able to, not we, but scientists were able to identify and realize that they thought that there used to be two species of Bandringa. There were big ones that would occur in fresh water, and there were small ones that would occur in coastal waters. And they realized they actually were the same species. Just the big ones would migrate, the adults would migrate down to coastal waters from down rivers and give birth. And these coastal areas were nursery areas for baby Bandringas, basically. There's Xenocanthus, another one that had this very strange, weird cranial spine that stuck out, some very different kind of fins that stick out of it. But again, if you look at all these, you'd say, hey, look, it looks pretty similar to a shark, even though these things are hundreds of millions of years old. And so far removed from our experience in the world that you'd think they should look nothing like anything you'd recognize again. But that's one of the kind of fun things about sharks is they're very good at what they do. And the reason they're so good at what they do is they're very good at it. So they keep propagating their genes to the next generation. Another well-known one is called Helicoprion. And so has anyone heard of Helicoprion? don't really feel like don't worry about answering it because we're not in person. But helicoprion was known from these jaw whorls. So as I mentioned, sharks have cartilaginous skeletons. Cartilage doesn't fossilize very well. So one of the few bits and pieces we have of elasmobranchs to look at are their teeth or their jaws, or sometimes their vertebrae, because those are the most heavily calcified parts of their skeleton, most likely to preserve. So helicoprion has been a source of interest for centuries, really. People have been finding these jaw whorls with these large teeth and trying to think of what they actually represent. And so there's a great artist that I like a lot called Ray Troll. He's from Alaska. He does a lot of great fish art. This is his interpretation of how other people interpreted helicoprion through time. So you can see here in all these different images, you can see that they have the tooth whorl in different places because we, again, had no idea what they actually were doing. And so you can see through all these are different authors, different scientists' interpretation of what that jaw whorl represents. You can see they have names and years associated with them going back to the 1800s. But we've learned recently that we think they look like this. So it looks a lot like, again, a shark. You'd be able to look at that and say, hey, there's a shark. But they had this tooth whorl right here at the end of their lower jaw, their mandible. They had these sharp cutting kind of blade, like a saw blade or a circular saw, and then these kind of crushing teeth in the back. And so we think that they did was that they ate these ammonites, which were extinct version cephalopods, basically, very similar to squid and chambered nautiluses and things like that. And so what happened, and this, I put this figure in here because it makes it look very fancy and scientific. There's all these vectors and abbreviations. It all gets down to kind of basically biomechanics and physics. So they love to eat, we think, these ammonites that had these shells. And so what they would do when they would bite them, because their teeth are oriented in that circular way and they face backwards, when they basically got pulled up into the jaw, it would pull the body, the soft, yummy part of the ammonite out of the shell, and then they can eat it and swallow it. Best guess, but still pretty cool adaptation to eat something that looks like that. Don't worry about crushing it. Just develop a jaw that can suck out the tasty bits. Just a few years ago, this paper came out. Frey et al., basically back in 2019, they actually found a fully fossilized skeleton of an extinct shark. You can see it right here. It's incredibly unusual, but it's from almost 400 million years ago. And this is what they think it looked like, these top two panels, A and B here. And this right here is a living shark called a frilled shark. So they think it looked very, very similar. Again, a great example of convergent evolution, where through evolutionary time, things just start looking the same because they have to live in the same environment and deal with the same challenges. So when you think about these extinct sharks, you kind of wonder, I'm an ecologist, I'm a biologist and ecologist, so I think about how animals interact a lot. And when I think about them back then, you just need to think about them as doing the same kind of stuff that sharks do now. They didn't do anything different. There's a huge fossil literature, which is fascinating to read. I'm not an expert, I'm not a paleontologist, but I still enjoy it a lot because I learn a lot, and it's all just makes me realize again how much what we see out in the ocean now is what was going on millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. This is a great example right here. This is a pteranodon, a flying dinosaur, right? We've all seen pterodactyls, pictures, animations of those things. This one was killed by a shark. This is its backbone right here, and this is a shark tooth embedded in it right there, you can see. The shark jumped up, much like a white shark. If any of you have seen Air Jaws, you've probably, in Shark Week, or Discovery Channel Shark Week, you've seen things like this. This is a great reconstruction of a paleo artist trying to imagine what it might have looked like, this incident. But again, this is something you would see today. This is actually just right in the neighborhood. You can see here is Maryland. I'm over here in Delaware, right around here. And this is Calvert Cliffs. And as Bronwyn mentioned, this is a great place to find fossils. And there's this great fossil right here. And this is a coprolite. Coprolite is basically a fossilized poop, right? So this was fossilized poop from an ancient extinct species of crocodilian that used to live up in the Chesapeake Bay. And what happened was it was killed by a shark, and the shark bit the abdomen and left teeth marks the teeth went through the abdomen and the intestines into the excrement itself, into the feces itself, and left the tooth marks right here. To the best of their kind of understanding, it probably was a older version of what we call now a tiger shark. But you can see here another nice little paleo artist kind of rendition of what probably happened. And here is another good example of a whale backbone with a megalodon tooth, right? So everyone knows megalodon, the giant prehistoric shark, and the meg and all that kind of stuff. There's a great fossil literature of animals being bitten and killed by megalodon. Here's another great one from, again, this area, where they found evidence of a big baleen whale being attacked by a shark, and it actually got bit on the pectoral fin. Here's a bone, here's the bone right here. And the fact that that scar is elevated means that that whale was bit and then healed before it died. So again, I find it to be fascinating. There are these predator-prey interactions, the same kind of stuff we study and learn about now that happened a long, 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 long time ago. So, stepping back, everyone talks about sharks being ancient and primitive. That is very true. But most of the sharks we see in the oceans today are actually relatively young from an evolutionary perspective. And so see here, if you go back, this is Silurian, Devonian, this is gonna be 600-700 million years ago. Most of the sharks that we have fossils for are long, long gone. They've been dead for millions, hundreds of millions of years. Extant sharks, the sharks that we have living in the world's oceans, for the most part, evolved back in the Jurassic, which is, again, when dinosaurs were around, Jurassic Park, all that kind of stuff. So that similarity in the way they look, again, is a reflection of convergent evolution. And so if you were interested and you ever wondered, what are the most recently evolved groups of sharks, skates, and rays? So you can see them right here. You have the devil rays and the batoids. Those are the flat sharks. So basically the mantas. They are very recently derived, not very old. The angel sharks in the family Squatinidae. Hammerhead sharks are very recently evolved, and then the saw sharks. So that's pretty much the most recently evolved groups of sharks, skates, and rays that we see swimming around the world's oceans right now. We owe a lot to sharks. And again, when I say sharks, I'm talking about chondrichthyans, so cartilaginous fishes. They were the first group of animals to evolve an actual proper brain. Right, so the typical vertebrate brains plan that we see in all vertebrates, so that means us, every mammal, reptiles, birds, all those things first evolved in sharks. Jaws were the first thing that first appeared in sharks, then went out and got, we can't do a lot. You'd be amazed how important your jaw is to surviving and being a living animal. Colons. The ability to digest different types of organic material in these complicated alimentary canals that we have now in all the vertebrates. First examples of animals moving around consistently, migrating. So migration is a very consistent thing we see in animals now. That first evolved in sharks. Suction feeding. So down here, this is a picture of a nurse shark. You can see right here. The video is just going on automatic, but you can see they're very, very good at sucking things in. Fishes are, we are, because our jaws can open and they can protrude, they can change the size of their oral cavity. They're able to create suction. The first group of animals to be able to do that, again, sharks. So we talk about sharks. We're talking about a group that we call cetaceans. So the superclass Cetacea. There's about 600 species, and I'm curious to hear the answer to the most recently described shark, because there's sharks being and skates and rays being described almost every day. You know, about, I don't know, 10 to 15 species are described every year, mainly because we're looking for them for the first time. But again, if you look at a shark, these all look very, very different. So they come in every shape, every size, every coloration you could ever imagine. And so while I'm talking about sharks, I don't want to ignore the flat sharks, subclass Batoidea. There's actually a lot more of the flat sharks. So all the skates and rays are the same thing, but basically just squished down so they're pancake-like, right? And so you can see these things all look very different too. Some are very big, some are very small. They do all different things. One of the reasons I'm particularly interested in sharks is they live everywhere. They live in the deepest parts of the ocean. They live in the open ocean. They live in shallow coastal areas, just like right off the coast here, up in Chesapeake Bay or in Delaware Bay. They also live in freshwater. This is a picture from Australia. This is a person on a guy sitting there in an interview. He was sitting on a golf course, and this is a bull shark swimming around a pond that is in a golf course in eastern Southeast Australia, connected to the ocean through a river. And that's actually one of the kind of interesting aspects, is that a few sharks are able to move out of marine environments, so out of salty water that's in the ocean, into fresh water. One of the most common ones we see, not most common because it's not that common, but one of the few examples of sharks that can go into fresh water are bull sharks. And so bull sharks are able to move way, way, way up rivers. So in North America, bull sharks have been recorded all the way up in Alton, Illinois. All the way up here. They swim up the Mississippi River all that way. And locally, they frequently swim up. They go way up Chesapeake Bay, up the rivers. Here in Delaware Bay, where I'm at, they go up the Delaware River. They go way past Philadelphia. It's kind of weird thinking about these big cities with sharks swimming through the rivers that go through them. But it is very, very true, and this still happens. There's a picture that floated around here a few years ago of a kayak fisherman in the Delaware River, 10, 20 miles north of Philadelphia, catching a really big bull shark. People don't really think of that. But that's actually what led to probably one of the most famous shark attacks or shark incidents in history. And this was the incident at Matawan Creek in New Jersey. This was the inspiration for Jaws. There's a creek right here. Here you can see a map. New York is right there. This is Raritan Bay. Matawan Creek is right there. Some bull shark, we think now, they actually blamed it on white sharks, swam up this creek, and ended up attacking and killing a few kids, for the most part, and adults. There's a few attacks on the coast along before that. There's a great book about it called like 1916, I think, or something like that. Caused a huge panic. This is what the site looks like right now. You can see here, this is the Garden State Parkway, right in New Jersey. Drives right over Matawan Creek. These yellow points right here are roughly where those attacks happen. And this caused huge waves. It was kind of the first time people started thinking about sharks. This news in 1916 kind of eclipsed all of the news coming out of World War I. There were millions of people dying, were done, and all that kind of stuff. But this actually drew a lot more interest and just kind of tapped into that fear that people have of marine predators. So sharks come, as I mentioned, in all shapes and sizes. The biggest one is a whale shark, the biggest fish in the ocean. You can see right here, here's a picture next to a person. They start out life being these adorable little button-sized, just cute as anything, little babies. And they grow up to be almost 70 feet and over 40 tons. Really, really big. Smallest shark, the dwarf lantern shark, maxes out at about that big. If you don't know much about it, it's been caught in a few trawls through time. We just know they're very small. They live in the deep ocean. That's about it. And so everything in between, there's representatives of animals, everything from between the whale shark size and the dwarf lantern shark size. But most sharks are not very big. And so that's the thing. Most people think of sharks as being these big, scary animals. Most of them are fairly small, a foot, 2 feet, maybe 3. Surprisingly, most people are kind of surprised. I know when I was learning about this for the first time, I was. Sharks are actually a lot more like mammals than they are other fishes, so bony fishes. They live a really, really long time. I'll talk about that in a second. They don't mature for a long time. They gestate their young for a very long time. So we carry our young for 9 months. Some of the animals, some of these sharks, skates, and rays actually carry their young for over 2 years. They don't have very many young. They invest a lot in it. So they have very few, very big young. They have internal fertilization like us. They give live birth like us for the most part. A few species actually will lay eggs, but for the most part, they give live birth. They will actually exhibit what we call maternal provisioning, which is just a way to say that the moms provide food to the babies when they're in utero. So we have placentas that feed the baby when they're inside the mother's uterus. Sharks have the same kind of structures, not just placenta, but everything else. I'll touch on that in a second. And some are actually endotherms. Some are actually warm-bodied like us, and reptiles, some reptiles, probably dinosaurs and birds. They're warm-bodied. So touching on a few of these things, sharks can live a really long time. Right now, this is probably the world record holder for the oldest lived shark. This is called a Greenland shark, lives up in the Arctic. Anyone have any guesses how long this animal lives? So if anyone has a guess, please let me know. Say something right now. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Anyone have any guesses how long these animals live?
People are putting 400.
Yeah, 400 years.
Yeah, all right. You know what you're talking about. Yep, up to about 400 years, we think. Again, we don't really know, but about at least 250 years, we think. Possibly up to 4 or maybe 500 years, which is crazy. The longest lived vertebrate in the planet. They don't actually mature, we think, until about 150 years old. So they can't even have babies until they're 150 years old. It's very, very crazy. So that's kind of weird. You think there's these big fish swim around the ocean that have been around longer than our nation, right? Though they're theoretically sharks that have been around since before the Mayflower landed in North America, which makes it especially sad when you figure out that a lot of these sharks are one of the most common bycatch species up in the Arctic, right? So every time they're dragging a trawl through it, they're pulling up these sharks that are maybe 400 years old. We mentioned internal fertilization. So this is very different than bony fishes, which are broadcast spawners. So they'll release their gametes, their sperm, their eggs into the water, and all the fertilization and everything happens outside the body of the mom and the father. Sharks are like mammals and reptiles and birds, that they have internal fertilization. So again, I talked about claspers. This is what it looks like. So if you ever see a shark and their pelvic fins, which are the fins that are kind of further back on the bottom, they have these long projections. Those are the claspers that let you know it's a male. Some species lay eggs. This is a horn shark, group of animals called the heterodontids. They actually lay these eggs that are screw shapes, spiral shapes. And what they do, and this is actually the one example of post-birth parental care in fishes or sharks. They'll lay the egg and then they'll carry it around until they find a nice place to stick it. And they basically screw it into cracks in the rocks or reefs or things like that to keep it safe. Some sharks have placentas, just the same as we do. You can see here is a baby lemon shark swimming out of its mom, just born. That's the umbilical cord. And they end up having a belly button, much like us. So if you ever catch a small shark, you can flip it over and you can see that they have belly buttons. But because they have internal fertilization, oftentimes, if you don't have hands and you don't have, arms, how do you hold on to an animal of the other sex? So they have to use their mouths. So when they obviously have big teeth, as a result, female sharks often have very thick skin. This is a blue shark, one of the most common sharks on the planet. This is a male cross section of their body. So you can imagine that if you just basically took a big knife and cut it in half, you'd see this. You can see the male has very thin skin. The female has very, very thick skin, sometimes 2 or 3 times thicker. That helps protect them when the males are mating with them. But they also have some really bizarre modes of reproduction as well. So one of our local species, the sand tiger shark, one of the most common sharks we see out here in Delaware Bay, they have what we call adelphophagy. Adelphophagy is intrauterine cannibalism. So the eggs are fertilized inside the uterus, and they're in the uterus of the mom. They have, and these sand tiger females, mature females, have 2 uteri, one on each side, a left and a right one. The fertilized eggs develop. The first one to actually hatch, I'll say hatch, but develop, basically then eats all of its siblings in utero. So the biggest one basically eats all of its brothers and sisters when they're in utero. So you only end up with 1 pup in each uterus. So you can see here, this is what sand tiger shark looks like. This is what a baby looks like. Those are the other eggs of soon to be developed brothers and sisters that the young one eats. So that's one of the most extreme examples. Another great example is white sharks. So great whites, so jaws, all that kind of stuff. They have a bizarre way of reproducing that we've just learned, continue to learn about. And so when I talk about we're learning about it, there's only a handful of near term, so pregnant female white sharks that have ever been caught in the world. You can probably count them on 2 hands, maybe like 8. So we don't know much. Which is one of the things I like to tell young people. There is so much to learn that we're still learning new things every day. So for a white shark, right? So the egg is fertilized. You have this fertilized egg that starts to develop into an embryo. And what the mom does then is she starts to secrete a milk-like substance into the uterus that the pup drinks and eats and consumes and uses to basically grow. Exactly the same kind of thing we do after we give birth, right? And then after a certain period of time, and actually this is the kind of fun thing, it was like a near-term pregnant female was caught in Japan. This is where this paper came from. This is maybe 5-6 years ago. They were finding 75 gallons of this, what we call histotroph, which is this uterine milk in each uterus. 75 gallons is a huge amount of energy to turn into milk, basically, to feed your babies. But that only lasts for a little while. After a while, they no longer produce that histotroph. And the pup, and you can see here it has a swollen, what we call an egg belly, because they basically sit there and their belly gets swollen with milk, but then it gets swollen with unfertilized eggs. So the female, the mom, basically pumps out eggs that aren't fertilized. They're just basically pure protein and lipid fat, and the baby eats them. And they end up having these huge stomach. You can see here is a baby white shark with a giant yolk sac stomach. And then after probably 18 months or so, they give birth. And at that point, a baby white shark is about 1.2, 1.3 meters and about 30 kilograms. So 4 feet, that's a big baby to give birth to. And these mature females give birth to anywhere from, 4 or 5 to maybe 10 or 12 pups in a litter. And they give birth to maybe like 3 or a litter every 2 or 3 years, depending on the female. And some species actually exhibit parthenogenesis. So virgin birth, which probably you may have heard about. Sometimes this is in the news a lot, where sharks give birth and they've never had sex, basically. There's no males, there's just females in a tank, in an aquarium, for example. And all of a sudden, they've been in there sometimes for 10 years, 20 years, all of a sudden they give birth. And so this is actually ends up being more and more common than I think we realize, because basically the more animals we have in captivity, the more we're seeing this. So it may be a much more basal, common strategy in vertebrates in general than we think, because again, sharks are the base of everything. Longest gestation period in the animal kingdom. So carrying their young around in the uterus, about 3.5 years is our best guess for this frilled shark. That's that species, same species I showed you from that fossilized record we found. So this shark, this weird looking, this is a shark, again, a very old group, but we've best bet right now is about 3.5 years they carry around their young before they give birth. Some elasmobranchs, some sharks, are actually warm-bodied like us, mammals. Mackerel sharks in the group Lamnidae, and then also the common thresher shark in the family Alopidae. You can see here, so a white shark is warm-bodied. So they're actually able to elevate their body temperature above ambient water temperature. So they're warmer than the water they live in for the most part. The top of the pile in terms of the ones that are the best able to generate and retain heat are my favorite shark, the salmon shark, and it's closely related to a congener, the porbeagle. Porbeagle is basically a salmon shark, but in the Atlantic, well, basically every ocean. The salmon shark is actually a porbeagle, but it's in the North Pacific. They are able to elevate their body temperature up to 21 degrees C or up to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit above the water temperature that they're living in, which has huge implications to what they can do and where they can go. And they're able to do this because they have their red muscle, which is a swimming muscle, kind of moves into the center of their body. And anytime you exercise, you get warm, right? You start to sweat. That's because muscle activity generates heat. The end result of all energy is heat. And so what's different with these animals is they're able to actually retain the heat inside their body. They don't lose it like other animals do. I can talk about that for hours. I'm not going to because it gets into the weeds. But this begs the question of why be warm-bodied? What is the benefit of being warm? So one thing is that some of these sharks and some of these other fishes that are actually endothermic, they kind of have this projection of their circulatory system that goes up to their head that basically floods their brain and their eyes with warm blood. And some animals actually have special organs in their head that generate heat or retain the heat in the brain. So if your brain is warm and your eyes are warm, you can think faster, you can see faster. You can actually, your eyes respond quicker to changes in light. The red muscle, which I talk about, which is like a marathon runner's muscle, because they are warm, are able to move more effectively, use less energy. So basically they're able to swim faster and more efficiently, migrate greater distances. They're also able to use different parts of the ocean that cold-bodied or ectothermic, poikilothermic species aren't able to use. So if you're cold-bodied or ectothermic, like a lizard, if it's cold outside, you're not moving much. These animals are like us, they're able to go out in the cold environment and be very active. And so because of that, they aren't constrained to the top part of the water column. So this is just a little figure from a paper showing depth. So here's the surface and you go down. Color coded basically by warm colors mean warm water, cold colors mean cold water. And so there's this feature in the oceans and lakes, every water body called the thermocline, which is where water temperature changes really quickly as you go down. So there's like a wall. If you've ever been scuba diving, you go through it, you go from warm water and all of a sudden you're like, woo, it's cold. That's a huge barrier in the open ocean and every water body for cold-bodied animals. They can't really go through it very well. If they do, they slow down and sometimes they can't even swim back up. These animals that are warm are able to go down and be very, very active and do whatever they want. So it's a huge evolutionary advantage. They are actually, sharks, skates, and rays have superpowers. They have electroreception. They're able to detect electrical fields. So it's like a sixth sense that we don't have that they have. They can detect incredibly small amounts of electrical output. So basically the equivalent, so you can see right here, I put down the actual numbers. They can detect this minuscule number compared to what we can detect. A fish swimming around produces about this much. So basically like a shark can detect what is the equivalent of a D-cell battery. If you threw it in the ocean and it was putting out an electrical field, a shark could detect that from several kilometers away. Or if you're thinking about, want to be grim and kind of morbid, if they're looking for humans, they could detect us without seeing us from 1 to 2 meters away without ever having to open their eyes. These little points here, I put these on here. These are the actual sensory organs. We call them the ampullae of Lorenzini. Each one of those points is the opening to a canal, a gel-filled canal that basically you can see here. This is cross-section. These are some images of different species. These lines are showing you where those canals go. The longer the line, the more sensitive they are to electrical currents. If you actually stick a light in it, like you can see here, they light up very well. So it's a very fascinating and powerful sensory capability they have. And this, all right, so I'm gonna, before I show this video, I wanna explain what you're gonna see. So this is going to be a baby bamboo shark, these cute little things. These are a oviparous species, so one of the few egg-laying species. So you're gonna see an egg of a shark, and you're gonna see the baby shark inside with its yolk, kind of like where he's looking at. And even inside this egg, they are using their electrosenses. So one of the most common predators of shark eggs are other animals, snails, other sharks, other fishes. And sharks aren't the only fish or animal that has electrosensory capabilities. And so if you want to camouflage yourself from those types of predators, you don't want to be creating electrical currents. And so what you're going to see is a simulated electrical field of a predator that's being basically shown to this baby shark in an egg. So here we go. So here's the shark. You can see it's breathing. It's pumping water over its gills. When it's breathing, it's creating electrical current because the muscles are moving. So right there, they turn on the current and you can see it stops breathing. So basically, if the predator shows up, the animal freezes, stops creating electrical currents, and therefore camouflages itself from predators that use electricity to find prey. Some sharks can walk. This is, again, kind of the origin of our ability to walk and leave the ocean. This is an epaulet shark, family genus Hemicillium. You see them very often in aquaria. They live in the Great Barrier Reef in the Indo-West Pacific, in places in reefs that at low tide, the reefs go out of the water. And these sharks get stuck in these tide pools functionally, and sometimes they have to leave. Or they're able to like move from one pool to the next and find food. And so you can see here, just some examples of these sharks walking around. They use their fins functionally like legs. They can be very, very fast. The mako shark is probably one of the fastest sharks in the ocean. This is a picture of a mako that was taking a bait. There was a fishing line. It gets hooked, and you can see how fast they go. This is one of the reasons makos are such popular game fish, is they jump out of the water a lot. And they're very fast. They've been clocked up to speeds of almost 50 miles per hour, which is very, very fast. They move a lot. So one of the record holders we have was this shark, this white shark that was tagged in South Africa down here. So here's the Indian Ocean, South Africa, Australia. It's tagged with satellite tags, a couple different kinds. And its name was Nicole. And it basically, we were able to track it from South Africa all the way across the Indian Ocean to Australia. At that point, the tag stopped working after about 90 days. And then after 6 months after it was tagged, it showed up exactly where it was tagged off South Africa. So 9 months after it was tagged, it had moved all the way across the Indian Ocean and back, or a distance of 13,000 miles in about 9 months. So these animals can really move. As I mentioned, the jaws aren't attached to their skull. Unlike ours, again, our lower jaw moves, but you can't stick it out. You can't stick it away from your head. It's very limited movements. But sharks are able to protrude their upper and lower jaw. And the record holder for that is the goblin shark. Right here, you can see it right here. They have what we call slingshot jaw protrusion, which is where they're able to shoot their jaw out up to almost 10% of their body length, which allows them, and this happens incredibly fast. So 3.1 meters per second. So about 10 feet, can move about 10 feet, the equivalent of 10 feet in about a second. Obviously it doesn't shoot out 10 feet, shoots out 6 or 8 inches. But this allows it to sneak up on things and shoot its jaws out and catch them very, very quickly because it has this unattached jaw. You can see here's the upper jaw, here's the lower jaw. It's attached to the skull itself, the chondrocranium right here, by this structure called the hyomandibula, which is kind of like just a lever that kind of shoots it forward. Sharks actually have brain sizes that are equivalent to ours and birds. So you can see here, these are a number of different shark brains. If you look here, here's body mass on this x-axis. So very, very, very small to huge, like, you know, whale shark size, elephants and stuff are kind of on this side. This is like a tiny baby fish that's a millimeter long. And this is brain mass on this side, on this y-axis. So basically, as you go up here, the blue line and the purple line down here, those are bony fishes and reptiles. This orange line is amphibians. So basically anything above these lines for a given body size have a much bigger brain. Elasmobranchs are right here. You can see they have similar brain sizes to birds and mammals. So there's probably a lot more going on inside their head than we realize. And a lot of that has to do with all these different electroreception, but also other sensory capabilities that they have. Sharks are social. We've learned through time, different research projects, that they know each other, they form friendships or relationships with each other, for lack of a better word. Bull sharks, as I mentioned, they actually have been shown to have long-term companionships. They move around in pairs or groups over years. Some of them don't like each other. If they show up, the other one will leave. They actually have some of the stingrays form what we call, I love this term, despotic social hierarchies, where basically the biggest male kind of runs it and beats up everyone smaller, and everyone's kind of afraid of it. Lemon sharks, seen right here, same thing as bull sharks. They develop familiarity with other individuals that they then start to like. And they actually have been observed learning how to do things just by watching other sharks do things. Manta rays, same kind of thing. They form long-lasting social groups that last for years. They actively, if they swim around, they find a ray they know, they will go to it and hang out with it. So there's a lot of sociality that we're just now starting to figure out and have the ability to look at and learn about. They're very, very curious. I'm going to show some pictures and video here of my previous life out on the West Coast in California, where we did a lot of work on white sharks in Central California. This is off the Farallon Islands. So you can see what we do here is basically what we do is we throw out a little decoy. That's a little cutout that looks like a seal or an elephant seal or sea lion with some flotation on it, and it's attached to a fishing line. So it's like fly fishing. You throw it out there, and you hope that the sharks, they swim around, basically swim around, they look up, and if they see a silhouette, they're usually very curious. They come up to check it out. Once they get up to the surface, they see the boat, and they'll come check it out. So you can see this is us right here, and there's a white shark that comes and sees the boat and is kind of curious and comes and pushes it around. And when they're by the boat, we're able to then do our work with it. We're able to tag it or get tissue samples, take pictures of it, identify it, a lot of different work. Okay, so here, I'm going to preface this video before I get into it, but this is going to show you a video of a white shark that we tag and how we do our work, which basically is we throw that decoy out. And the last thing we want to do is we don't want the shark to actually bite it, because this minute the shark bites the decoy, it knows it's not edible, and it gives up and it leaves. This was a moment when, if you watch us down on the bottom, you can see that we're not paying attention. The shark sneaks up. They're very sneaky too, right? So you can see the decoy up here. The shark comes up and bites it, and we're like, uh-oh. And off it goes, right? One of the reasons why you need to really be on your toes when you're working with these animals, because they are very, very sneaky. This is just a video. We started to, one of the reasons that we try to get them next to the boat is we want to get pictures of their dorsal fin. Every shark has a unique dorsal fin, like a fingerprint. And it lasts for decades. We have some individual sharks out in California been seen since the 80s every year. So long-term kind of consistent occurrence at these hotspots that we go do our work. But the reason we want these dorsal fin shots is so we can identify them. And sometimes the sharks don't come to the surface. So we want to have video underwater so we can see get a fin shot underwater. So we started putting cameras, little GoPros, on these decoys so we can get pictures of sharks we never see. And this is just an image showing you what generally happens sometimes. So you see the shark comes up. This shark almost never really breaks the surface. You can see the tip of the fin barely does, but then it comes in. And that's one of those examples of a sad kind of situation where, you know, the shark bites it and then leaves. You can see the hull of our boat right here. The next boat, or not boat, but video I'm going to show you, I like to show because it shows how sensitive the sharks are to what they bite. The next video is a camera on the top of the decoy, and you're going to see the shark come in and it's going to bite. And I want you to watch what the teeth do. So this is the top of the decoy. And did you see how the teeth retract back up? So I'll show that again just so you can see it in case you missed it. So watch the teeth. The shark bites, realizes it's not edible, and the teeth go back up and it swims away. This is and when we talk about most shark attacks, this is what happens. Sharks don't have hands. They can only find out if things are edible or not if they are tasty, and they do that by tasting. This shark was very curious. They can be very, very sneaky. As I mentioned before, that's why we have the video cameras. A lot of them are very camouflaged. This is a wobbegong, tasseled wobbegong right here. They live in Australia. It uses the tip of its tail. You can see they basically are very well camouflaged. They blend right in the bottom. Uses the tip of its tail as a lure, basically to bring animals in. When they get close, they'll suck them up. Very similar to this angel shark here, which lies on the bottom and waits until something comes by and sucks it up. This is a baby horn shark, which actually has a dorsal fin spine. It ends up spitting it back out because it's not palatable, so it survives, so don't worry about it. This is a little swell shark. These cute little sharks that basically live in the Eastern Pacific and rocky reefs. And they will actually sit in holes in the reef and wait for the tide or the wave surge to basically going back and forth towards the hole and back. And there's a little fish that'll be in that surge, and it'll bring the fish close to its mouth and away from the mouth and back close to the mouth and away from the mouth as the waves are going back and forth. And the shark will just sit there and open its mouth and close it as the fish gets further and closer away until eventually it gets close enough to it just bites it. You can see here is a stingray being very clever, hiding behind this little fish right here. But again, very great camouflage, very sneaky. This is oftentimes how they end up finding their prey. And as always, they're not above taking advantage of a snack. This is taken out just here in Delaware Bay. This is a sand tiger shark that was captured during some research long lines out here. This is a smooth dogfish that was on our long line that we're pulling it up, and when we're pulling it up, the sand tiger came and basically hoovered it up. So not all sharks are predators or meat eaters, as you might think. This is a few years ago, we learned that this little cute thing called a bonnet head, the smallest of the hammer sharks or hammerhead sharks, is able to actually eat and digest plants. It's the first example of an omnivorous shark or elasmobranch. So something that's able to assimilate plant and animal material. Another one of my favorite sharks is the cookie cutter shark. Cookie cutter shark are these very bizarre deep water sharks you see right here. This is it right here. They see big eye. They max out at about, I don't know, big ones maybe 60 centimeters or so. So less, about 2 feet, probably about as big as they get. They're deep water, and like many deep water animals, they have bioluminescence. They're able to create their own light. So this is what they look like. And you see they have this band around their collar, around their gills right here. And so what they're able to do is float there in the midwater, 500 meters, so 2,000 feet under the surface, where it's very, very dark. The only light is a little bit of light that filters down from the surface. They're able to use their eyes to detect the wavelength and intensity of light. And they use their bioluminescent organs on their stomach to replicate that exact same wavelength and intensity. And when they do that, so if they didn't have these photophores, this bioluminescence, you would see a silhouette of the animal. Because they're able to replicate it, they functionally dissolve and disappear into the downwelling light. So any predator that's swimming beneath them, and almost every marine predator that uses vision uses silhouettes to find prey. So things lit up against a bright background. What they see is just this, nothing but this little bit of the collar that doesn't have the bioluminescent organs on it. And so it looks like a small prey item. And so these animals, these bigger predators, then move towards it thinking they have an easy meal. And when they get close to it, the shark is able to basically dart in and use its very unique jaw morphology. So you see, this is its jaw. This is the lower jaw. It's the upper jaw. They have these little tiny teeth on the upper jaw. They basically stick it into the predator, scoop in with their lower jaw, and then spin their body. And they remove these perfect cookie cutter shark or cookie cutter sized bites of tissue. If you ever go out whale watching or see anything out in the open ocean, you will see these bites on them. They bite everything. This is a stranded whale. You can see these are all healed bites. This is a dolphin. You can see the bite out of it. This is a part of a submarine that actually got taken out by a cookie cutter shark. And actually, one of the fun stories back, the reason they discovered cookie cutter sharks was back in the Cold War during the late 70s, early 80s. Our nuclear subs had their sonar domes stop working when they were at sea, to the point where they couldn't navigate and know what they were doing. They had to return to base and go through months of repair. They thought, and this is what happened right here, right? So they take these bites out of these very sensitive sonar domes. We thought that the Soviet Union had come up with some top secret weapon that would allow them to disable our subs. Turns out the Soviets thought the same thing, that we had it, because their subs were having the same bites. A lot of the undersea cables that we're laying out for power, for internet, get bit. Turns out it's these little guys. Pressure sharks have these remarkable tails, long, long tails. So what you're going to see here is how they actually use them. They use them like a whip. They basically swim through schools of fish, flap that tail, and they whack them. It actually is so fast and so strong, it calls what we call cavitation, which is where hydrogen and oxygen atoms split. There's so much power in it that it'll create bubbles. So they'll actually whack the fish, stun them, and then scoop them up. Tiger sharks. This is another great paper. This came out a few years ago. Baby tiger sharks in the Gulf of Mexico. So here's the United States. Here's the Gulf of Mexico. We're up here. Any of your bird watchers, you know about the massive migrations of songbirds and other animals that are moving north and south. One of the big flyways goes over the Gulf. And they're flying over, night and day. And oftentimes they get confused by the lights and oil rigs at night and things like that. Or they just get tired and they end up landing in the ocean and drowning. And these baby tiger sharks, you can see right here, have learned about this, and they start to aggregate and feed on songbirds. It's one of the weirdest things you can imagine. It's like little baby sharks living out here are eating songbirds. They've learned about that. Same thing actually in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. Albatrosses and boobies and other kinds of seabirds will fledge. They have to take their first flight at some point. It happens at very particular times of the year. They'll try out flying. Some of them make it, some of them don't. They land in the water. Tiger sharks have learned this, and they show up at these particular beaches and atolls at the particular time of year when this happens, and then they basically gorge on those birds. They provide what we call bioinspiration. So they inspire us biologically. So we can look at the form and function of these animals and learn how to better design things through engineering. The Navy is spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of years of dollars coating the bottom of their ships with artificial manufactured shark skin. Shark skin is covered with these dermal denticles, these tiny teeth. If you've ever felt a shark, if you rub it from nose to tail, it's very smooth. If you go the other way, it's very rough. It's because they have these tiny teeth. Here's some x-rays, some very zoomed in microscopic views of those teeth. So the water flows from the front to the back here, and it helps them basically move more efficiently through the water. For a while, they were actually using this in the swimming suits competitively. So you can see here, Michael Phelps, they'd have these sharkskin suits that's now been outlawed in competitive racing because it gives them such an advantage. Racing yachts and things were doing that for a while. It actually make them move a couple knots faster, which is huge. One of the other very cool things is that it turns out the reason you don't see sharks covered with animals and plants and kelp and mussels and barnacles is that nothing wants to stick to shark skin. That's why the Navy is coating the bottom of their vessels with it. Otherwise, they have to spend a lot of money every so often cleaning the hull so they can move through the water. So it turns out that even bacteria and viruses don't stick to it. So people have started to manufacture fake shark skin and put it on different surfaces, handles of doors, to reduce the spread of disease. They are starting to use it in medical operating rooms and things like that to prevent the spread of antibiotic-resistant bacteria and other things like that. So we've learned a huge amount by just looking at how these animals work. This is a shameless plug for some of the work my lab is doing, where we're actually using sharks as ocean sensors. So we're actually putting ocean observing tags on sharks. So when we basically let them go, every time they come to the surface, they transmit data to satellites about what's going on in the ocean where that shark is. And we're using that to help inform hurricane predictions. So by tagging a lot of sharks, having to swim around the northwest Atlantic, we're going to basically be helping to supplement shipborne observations, glider observations. So there are these basically like marine ocean-going robots that we release into the ocean. And right now we have these picket lines we put out. NOAA puts out, University of Delaware is a place that actually puts out some of these gliders. And you can see here, these lines are showing you where these picket lines are, and we deploy them during hurricane season because the ocean or the heat content of the ocean has a direct role in terms of the strength of a hurricane and where it goes. So you can see these glider lines are and the ocean going vessel like observation lines are very minimal. The ocean is a big place. So we are going to tag a bunch of sharks. We're tagging a bunch of sharks that move all over the place to basically fill in all the gaps and help improve hurricane predictions in a variety of different ocean models. So I could keep talking forever and ever about sharks. I think they're fascinating. One of the most important things that I try to get across in every discussion I have about sharks is, should we be afraid of them? Everyone's kind of afraid of sharks, right? And understandably so. And a lot of this is from Jaws, one of the first blockbusters that really happened. And as a result, we still see this. If you see Shark Week on Discovery Channel, or you see news stories about sharks, you see things like this. The beast in the east, or the Coast Guard fires at sharks, and so on. It's everything about sharks being bad and scary. And the reality is, it's just not the case. We are not on the menu for sharks. They don't care about us. They don't want to bite us. They don't want to eat us. If they bite us, generally it's mistaken identity. And most shark attacks are actually very, very minor. And we're trying to actually move away from the idea of using the word attack. It's more incident or interaction or bite. An attack is not what generally happens. And this is what most shark attacks look like. Like this, where there's someone down there messing around with the shark, and the shark gets territorial or scared and defends itself. Most shark attacks are actually provoked, which is where fishermen catch them or harass them and they bite them. All right, so for the most part, despite their ferocious reputation, sharks really aren't a threat to people. I can't convey that strongly enough. How likely are you to die by shark attacks? If you're ever interested, go to the International Shark Attack File website. They have all kinds of amazing statistics. I pulled a few of these off of that. See right here, heart disease, cancer, stroke, car accidents, accidental poisoning, falling, drowning, bike accident, train crash, everything. Shark attack is way down there. You hear the story, coconuts falling on your head is more of a risk. I like this statistic down here. Over a course of a 10-year period from like 2000, 2010, more people died in sand holes. You dig the big sand holes on the beach and the sand hole collapses and kills a person. More people died from that than being attacked by sharks in the entire world. So should we be afraid of sharks? No. Should sharks be afraid of us? Yes. So here you go, annual human fatalities from sharks globally, with hundreds of millions, billions of people spending hundreds of billions of hours in the ocean. 6 or 7 people get killed per year around the world. It's not even statistically possible to analyze these numbers. Annual shark fatalities from humans, so sharks being killed by people, each one of these equals 1 million sharks. So who's at risk from whom? So most shark interactions are like this, actually. This is a tiger shark, one of the most dangerous sharks in the ocean. This person didn't even know the shark was there. Most of us, if you ever go in the ocean, you're going to be around sharks. They say, hey, like you get this question, and the common answer is like, hey, should I be scared of sharks? Are there sharks in this body of water? And if you taste it, is it salty? Yes. You've been in the water with sharks if you've been in the ocean. Have you been attacked? No, because they don't care. Why should we care about sharks? They play an incredibly important role in our ecosystems. They're really important predators, much like the lions of the savannah, the tigers of the jungle. If you remove them, things change and things don't get better. So you have these things called trophic cascades, where if you remove these upper trophic level predators like lions or sharks, it has cascading effects that go through the whole food web, all the way down to the plants, basically. Great example of this is coral reefs. So you have here a nice healthy reef where there's lots of sharks. The sharks eat the big fish that eat the things that eat the algae and the other plants. And because of that, the coral is healthy. You have a robust, great, beautiful, colorful coral reef ecosystem. When you remove the sharks, they are gone. Those smaller but still bigger predators then eat all the animals that eat the algae and other things. And the algae overgrows the reefs and smothers them. And you end up having these very poorly inhabited, low abundance, low diversity coral reefs that are functionally kind of dead. Another great example, and the sad thing is that sharks are functionally extinct in about 20% of the world's coral reefs. So they've been fished out so heavily that in 20% of the coral reefs that we go out to, sharks don't really play an ecological role anymore because there's aren't enough of them. Another great example of that is bull sharks in South Africa. So South Africa is one of the few countries that still has shark netting, where they put out shark nets on the swimming beaches. And the idea is that if you kill the big scary sharks, they won't be around to eat people. Bull sharks are one of the common ones. They got wiped out pretty well off of South Africa for a little while. And what happened is it turns out bull sharks actually eat a lot of small sharks. The most common predator of sharks is other sharks. And those small sharks love to eat the kind of fish that divers like to go spearfishing for and fishermen like to fish. So by removing the bull sharks, caused a population explosion of the predators that ate everything that humans like to eat. So these ecological interactions are really important. And understanding how these sharks fit into these dynamics is really important. That's what actually we spend a lot of time doing. This is a great example of it. These are like some coral bommies, some coral heads, little bits of coral, and there's lots of critters that live in these bits of coral, little small fish and crabs and shrimp and things like that. And basically they kind of stay there until they feel confident they're not going to eat, and then they'll swim away and do their foraging and their other stuff, and then they'll come back. And if there's predators around, they're going to be scared. They're not going to go as far. So they're going to not leave cover. That's going to change their behavior, even if the predator is not trying to eat them, it's just by being seen. So you can see this. This is a picture from an airplane. This is a coral reef. Each one of these black points is one of these coral heads. You can see these halos around them. That is showing you how far the animals that live in that little bit of coral reef are willing to venture away from their shelter. And if there's sharks around, you see this. The animals aren't going very far because they're afraid of being eaten. It doesn't matter if the sharks aren't trying to eat them. They're just by being there. There may be some bunch of sharks over here in this area, and they're not here. And so the shark animals are going out and grazing and doing everything. And that changes the whole way that those ecosystems work. I'm going to skip this because it's basically kind of covering the stuff I've already said. But this is kind of an important point I like to make, is that because we've been out there in the ocean, fishing out a lot of different critters. It's changed everything in the ocean that we see now. And what we see now is not the way the oceans used to look. And there's this concept called fishing down the food web. And so what happens is big animals get targeted first. They're full of protein, they're delicious. So we fish them out. And as we've gone through and fished out most of these bigger critters, we're focusing on smaller and smaller animals. So the trophic level, meaning where they feed on the food chain, like an apex predator is at the top of the food chain, they're a very high trophic level. A plant is at the bottom of it. We are at this point fishing way down here. We've pretty much fished out most of this stuff. You can see this here. This is a great paper. This is a single fishing operation from the Florida Keys. This is back in the 50s. You can see that they're on a single day. What they do is they go out and they fish and they bring all their catch back and they line it up and they take pictures of it. This is what they would catch. This one business, Florida Keys, back in the 50s. You see big fish, hammerheads, all this stuff. This is the 80s, and this is about now, 2007. This is what we're catching, right? So these are important kind of dynamics that really influence the world's oceans. And this leads to this idea of shifting baselines. What we see in the ocean, we think this is natural because we were raised. But the idea is that what we see in the ocean now is not natural. We don't know what natural looks like. We don't have any evidence. We don't know what the oceans look like 5,000 years ago. So there's a whole field of research called historical ecology. We're trying to reconstruct these things. But so for a great example here, shifting baselines. For us, this is what we think of the ocean. There's a lot of microplastics, jellyfish, not a lot of stuff. If you jump in the ocean, you're not going to probably see much. But if you jumped in the ocean like 200 or 300 years ago, you'd see all kinds of stuff. So what we think is natural is this, but our ancestors, this is what they thought of the ocean. And that's what they experienced. Great example of this is white sharks. So great whites. I'm sure probably most of you have at least heard about how their populations are rebounding because they're protected, which is fabulous. It's a great conservation success story. It's great for marine ecosystems. It's great for everything. But there are drawbacks, right? So white sharks will bite people. And they're coming back to Cape Cod, for example. So here's some pictures of it. And this is because we've started to conserve marine mammals, their primary prey. So the gray seals, their populations have rebounded and they're starting to recolonize areas that they used to be. So Native Americans, the indigenous peoples of North America, would have not thought that it was weird that there were white sharks off of Maine or Nova Scotia or Cape Cod or Delaware or Chesapeake. They would have seen them, they would have interacted with them. But we're starting to actually now see that with the recovery of these prey items, the sharks are coming back with them. It's great, it's a success story, but there are implications for it. And importantly, sharks don't really have anywhere to go, right? So if we go in the ocean, we're choosing to go into their environment, right? We don't have to go fish. We don't have to do these things. We're choosing to. We need to some extent because our populations are exploding. Human populations are like getting bigger and bigger. 30, 40, 50% of the world's population gets their protein from the ocean, from fishes and things like that, aquaculture. This is showing you fishing effort over the course of several months and back in 2012, just as an example. These points here are showing you where fishing vessels are and where they're active and most active globally. If you basically integrate this, combine this over the course of the year, you get this. The green here, the darker green means more fishing effort, lighter colors mean none. And what you see is that basically no part of the world's oceans are free from industrial fishing effort. Sharks can't hide anywhere for the most part. The Southern Ocean here is too rough for most fishing vessels to go. Pretty much most of the rest of the world's oceans are just being hammered by longliners and purse seiners and trawlers and all that kind of stuff. This has impacted sharks very clearly. Populations have gone down. This is an image, some rooftops in Hong Kong, the shark fin industry. These are all shark fins that have been taken off. They're drying there, so we've been used. Those Ceratotrichia we talked about for shark fin soup. But things have been generally grim around the world. These numbers vary, but we're talking about declines in shark populations of 70 to 99% probably. People argue about those numbers, but no one argues no one is saying that it hasn't been a huge problem. Scientists like to argue about small numbers. So we'll say it's 66% versus 75 versus 90. Doesn't matter. It's a lot. And sharks, skates, and rays are about the most endangered group of vertebrates on the planet. So if you see here, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, it's a UN group that thousands of scientists, myself included, work in to try to assess how at risk these different groups of animals are. And we rank them based on, are they critically endangered, vulnerable? There's a variety of different criteria. And this is a little bit out of date at this point, but pretty much accurate. Sharks, for the most part, about a quarter of the sharks are threatened with extinction at one level or another. And worryingly, about 50%, we don't even know enough about to say whether they're threatened or not. Right. So this is why we spend a lot of time trying to do this work. And again, I like to tell the young kids out there, we're going to need your help in the future to keep learning about this stuff. And how can we help? I won't spend a lot of time here because I've talked too long probably, but there's a lot of things we can do. And basically, like your pocketbook speaks, buy things that are shark friendly, fish friendly, sustainable, all that kind of stuff. Avoid microplastics, single-use plastics. Yada, yada, yada. You probably have all heard this. So with that, I'm going to leave you. I'm sorry I talked too long. Like I said, I'm sorry. I like to talk, especially about sharks. So I hope you learned something, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Don't apologize, Aaron. That was wonderful. You can unshare and come back, and we can take a few questions. I know that there was one early on when you were talking about the paleos. It was, did prehistoric sharks scavenge like the modern sharks? Were they part of the cleanup crew for flying dinosaurs that died over the water? And then you kind of talked about the songbirds, so that kind of made a connection there.
Yep, no, absolutely. Like as I mentioned, sharks, what we see them doing now, they have been doing the same thing for almost 500 million years, which I just think is, I just like that. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, humans have been around for what, 50,000 years, 100,000 years? These sharks have been out there for so long doing this and doing it well, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah, we still have so much to learn.
Yep. And that's the fun part. I mean, we're learning new things every day.
Yeah.
So people think that we know all this stuff, but we don't.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand and unmute, or you can put it in the chat box and I'll forward it on to Aaron. Okay, Jillian, what's the strangest thing ever found in the shark's stomach?
Oh boy. You know, I don't really know, but people have found things like, well, I've read, I don't actually know if it's true or not, but people have said they found suits of armor. They found actually in Greenland sharks, the ones I talked about live forever, they found polar bears and caribou and things like that. Pretty much if it's in the ocean, sharks will eat it. And that includes garbage. So tiger sharks, they're called the garbage can of the sea sometimes, because they'll kind of suck up everything. So if it occurs, they'll in the water and they see it, they will take a bite out of it and eat it if they can.
We have any other? Now, is it, we have a group listening in from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Dr. Carlisle, and they're saying that they're loving every minute of it. And then everybody else is saying that they could listen to you till midnight. So
I'm glad I didn't exhaust everybody. That's good.
You did. Any other questions going on right now? I know my brain is on fire with everything that I've learned. Let's see, anybody have a question?
Yeah, please. If anyone has any questions, just unmute yourself, turn your camera on or not, and just let her rip. I see someone asked, why is the salmon shark my favorite?
Oh, okay.
That's because they're great. They're the best shark. No, because they're endothermic, which I talked about. They're unique in the fish world where they can kind of go wherever they want. Yeah, so like for most animals, you can see them following temperatures. I'm sorry to include it in this talk, but we did a lot of tagging of these animals, salmon sharks, and there was a period of time in like the middle of winter, so like January, February, where we had salmon sharks swimming around up in the Bering Sea. So if you've ever seen Most Dangerous Catch or Most Dangerous Catch thing on Discovery Channel about the crab fishermen up there in the winter when it's the Arctic, so it's dark. There's ice everywhere. There's this warm-bodied shark up there in the dark doing its sharky thing. And the same time, we had tagged sharks off of Hawaii. We had the sharks off of Japan. We had sharks off of California. The distribution for a species is no other fish can do that, can be in such a disparate range of habitats as you see in the salmon shark. And the porbeagle too. Porbeagle is just as cool, much prettier too. Salmon sharks also have spots on their stomach, which I just think is cute.
Let's see. Taylor wants to know where they can see a whale shark.
Well, you can go generally one of the best places to see it off of the Yucatan Peninsula. There's a place, Isla Holbox. You can actually go diving or snorkeling with them. You can also find them pretty much anywhere in the tropics if you're in the right place at the right time. There are a few places in the Philippines where you can generally find them, but there aren't that many of them. And so anytime you see a whale shark, it's pretty special. But those are a few of the places where there are ecotourism operations to go see them.
And there's the Vermilion Sea Institute off of Baja.
Yeah, Baja is another one off in the Sea of Cortez off La Paz. That's another place.
They do annual trips that you can go to that they sell out really quickly. So let's see, what is a good book or book about sharks, including some of the social behavior?
Oh boy, that is a very good question. The social behavior stuff, probably not. There probably aren't any really books. I mean, it's not very well understood or known. There are a lot of different books out there. It depends on what kind of book you like. There's some very good books that have a ton of information, like Sharks of the World by Dave Ebert and Mark Dando and others. There are a lot of more personal kind of books like I'm blanking on it. I'm sorry, I can't remember the names right now, but there are tons of books. If anyone has any questions, my email was on the presentation. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to respond. I respond generally as quickly as I can. Beginning of semester, it's always a bit crazy, but I can't think of them off the top of my head right now, but that's one of the big ones. Wait, here's one. This is it. This is the one I mentioned, Sharks of the World. By Dave Ebert. That's backwards, so you're not going to be able to see it.
Dila says, what are some go-to sentinel species that give you an idea of shark population health? I guess, can one tell you more about not the other?
So population health. Yeah, so there are no good, every species is different. Every species has its own risks and threats and sources of basically mortality. And so for the most part, counting how many fish are in the ocean is a challenging thing to do. And if you figure out how to do it, you will make $1 trillion, because that's what all of our fisheries agencies try to figure out and how to do. But counting how many fish are in the ocean ends up being really, really hard. It's a fundamental question, but you can't see them, you can't count them. So we have different surveys we do through time, and you basically can see if in general is catch going up, are we catching more of them or fewer of them? And so we have these different long-term surveys that happen. And in the US, I'm happy to say that we have probably the best fisheries management in the world, outside of maybe Australia and a few of the more developed countries. So our sharks are actually doing really well compared to most places in the world. And so we actually have done a really good job conserving them and making fisheries for them sustainable. And that's why we have white sharks coming back in New England, for example. But having said that, it's hard to do. There's no good way to kind of, if if you come up with an idea, I'm sorry, I don't remember who asked the question. If you have a good idea of how to actually figure out how to do that, please let us know how to count them and figure out if their populations are doing well, because it is a constantly moving target and it's not easy to do.
One of the pictures that you showed, the one with all of the shark fins, is so disturbing. And that's going on. I mean, this kind of goes into a question that Taylor says, what is the best way to get people to see them not as villains? Also internationally, is there a call to stop the finning, and how is that going? And I mean, we all rallied around the ivory and tusks and things like that. Maybe they're more charismatic with the elephants than sharks, but what's going on in that realm?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, shark finning is a problem. It's actually probably less of a problem right now than it was maybe 5-10 years ago. I think that actually there's been a lot of effort trying to educate people, especially in East Asia, China, and it's actually done a pretty good job, where the demand for shark fin soup has actually gone down. And so there's the Chinese basketball player, what's his name, Yao Ming or something like that. I'm not a sports person. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. He actually had this huge campaign. He's passionate about it, trying to educate Chinese about shark fin soup, why it's not good. It's made a huge impact. So people don't know. And that's the thing, is like, people are not doing this malevolently. People need to make a living. People need to eat. It's not like they want to kill sharks. They just want to survive. And so it's more important to try to educate them. And that's actually going on. There's a lot of efforts going on. The flip side is, it's actually kind of interesting. In the US, for example, there's a lot of effort to try to, outlaw shark fin trade and stuff like that. But in the interest of being kind of even keeled and devil's advocate, if we have shark fishermen that are in the US that are out there harvesting sustainably and they're catching shark for meat, shouldn't they be able to sell their fins? Because the animal's dead one way or the other. The animal doesn't care whether it's being killed for its fins or its meat. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth between, like, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to conserve the animals? What is the societal outcome we're looking for? But beyond that, it's more of a, yeah, it's just hard. There's so much. If you watch Shark Week, which is the flagship of everything shark related in most, in the US and Canada, probably in Europe, that's where most people see this stuff. It's all dramatic. Sharks are dangerous. It's all blood and guts. It's just discouraging, because, like, if you watch Shark Week, I just watched some of the ones from this last year. I love it. I grew up with it. I was watching the first Shark Weeks back when I was a kid, but it's not about sharks. It's more about the risk. It's about the people, the personalities that are doing the research, or the cameramen or whatever. And it's not so much about education as drawing people in with, what are they going to bite? Oh, they bit a person over here. Oh, look at this blood. Look at this. So it's like everything is couched in the scariness of them. And it's just, it has to get away from that. Because I mean, it's like literally cows kill more people than sharks. Everything kills more people than sharks. It's just, when you look at the numbers, it's mind blowing that people are scared of them. Because if nothing else, if sharks were interested in us, you wouldn't be able to go in the ocean. You would be chomped instantly. So it's just, to me, it's this kind of, yeah, it's not an easy kind of nut to crack. So again, if anyone has any ideas, please let us know.
Well, and that's why I said in the promo for this, you think that the Shark Week on Discovery is not the whole story. This is it. And now that you have the information, you're part of the solution, because you can take it and start telling other people what you have learned. So you can start telling the story and changing people's outlooks and opinions on sharks. Another thing that is optimistic is, since sharks have been around for a long time, I'm sure there's gonna still, they found a way to survive so much, I'm sure they're gonna be able to survive us. So they don't have anything to worry about. We certainly do.
And yeah, I would like to also point out that we have very few examples of shark skates or rays that have gone extinct. And that's kind of true across the board in marine environments. The ocean is such a big area that it's kind of hard to make most marine species go extinct. The ones that are easier to make go extinct are the mammals, like whales and seals and things like that, that are anchored to the land or the surface. So there are sharks, skates, and rays do go extinct, but not very often. So there is a lot of risk. We're concerned about it, but to date, it hasn't happened that often. So that's kind of a source of encouragement, I think, as well.
I like to end on a high note, so that was a good high note. Yay, sharks! You were out there at the beginning. You're still out there doing your sharky thing, and you'll be doing it for a long time to come. And we love you for it. And thank you so much, Dr. Carlisle, for coming and sharing your knowledge, expertise, and passion with us for these creatures. And we're definitely going to take what you have taught us and go teach others. So I hope that you'll still take my calls if I call you again to come back and do some more stuff for us.
Happy to.
At the Natural Society, because you are wonderful. And thank you all for coming. And hope to see you at the museum at some of our programs that are coming up, as well as back online. So take care, everybody. Stay well, stay curious, and stay outside. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks very much. Great talk.
Yes, it certainly is. It certainly is. Thank you, everybody. Glad y'all tuned in. He's wonderful.